Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Happy December. This year has flown by. I can't believe we're almost done it and it's kind of scary. I'm hoping that 2022 is a little bit more promising sounding than 2021 has been, because we've just had like flooding, fires, drought, and all that fun stuff along with all the COVID variants and whatnot. So happy December. I can't wait for the winter solstice personally, because then at least I can look on the bright side that every day after that is going to get a little bit longer, because it's so depressing when it gets dark at like 3:30. So anyways, today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm doing a dramatic reading of a book that I found that I wrote and illustrated when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and of course it's about horses, so I wanted to read it and show it to you guys for the first time. And then I just wanted to talk about some stuff in it and how I think it kind of reflects on the horse world, because there is some stuff in it that it's like, like as a 5 or 6 year old, like how did you come up with that if it wasn't being directly portrayed to you? You know what I'm saying? Picking up what I'm putting down. Well, that's why I want to talk about it, because it's kind of a messed up book, and some of you guys are probably going to look at this and go, wow, holy shit, Shelby, you were a very troubled child. And maybe I was, but also maybe I was just more insightful and I saw shit before people tried to erase it from my brain and kind of indoctrinate me into believing something. That aside, I also think that the writing style that I had as a kid is very reflective of a lot of like animal movies, like horse and dog movies, where like usually the climax of the movie is the animal like dying to save the human or something. Or in horse movies, I don't know if any of you guys watched The Silver Stallion as a kid. It was like this Australian film about this wild Australian Brumby that everyone wanted to catch, and they called him the Silver Stallion. Anyways, in that movie, I distinctly remember, and I'm pretty sure this actually happened, but the stallion jumped off a cliff to get away from the people. When they finally rounded him up on a dead-end cliffside where they could finally catch him, he just fucks off and he jumps the cliff rather than being caught. So, like, that's kind of what I was taught as a child in movies, is that, yeah, horses would literally rather die than be caught by these, like, Yankee, let's go whippy whippy, catchy catchy type people. But anyways, let's get started into the book. So before we get into the book, I just have to do a shameless self-promo. This is a Christmas version of my milestone design that I had drawn up with a little Santa hat on it. It's really cute Christmas type sweater for people that aren't into like the busy, like ugly Christmas sweaters. But we also have those. If you are, you should check them out. And then of course this hat is also my logo, and it's warm. I love toque season. For those of you who aren't Canadian, it's beanie season, but toque if you are Canadian. Anyways, we'll get into this book. Check out my shop at the link in my bio down below in the description, and yeah, you can get fun little things like this while supporting a wee small little Canadian businesswoman. So neat. Okay, so this is the book. It's just called The Stallion, and of course it's a chestnut. Of course it has to be. And anyways, by Shelby. Right here, as you can see, I have given myself the Best Book Award. There is also another one that used to be on this side that was like a little champion ribbon that I also gave to myself for writing this book. We stand a little child that rewards herself and knows her worth. But one thing I want you to note about the book is this freaking creepy, bloody, ghost-like demon horse. That's just right there. And yeah, that's your first sign that something in this book just isn't quite right, and maybe the kid writing it is a little bit different. Yeah, so just we're gonna zoom in on that little thing there. I also want to add that there is somewhere in the distance, somewhere in a box that I need to dig up, there is a Stallion 2. So there's a sequel to this out there in my house somewhere, hopefully still, that I would love to find, because when we get to the end of this book, you'll see why. It's a real cliffhanger. Like, I'm gonna have a fan club. We might even need to start doing fanfic of the Stallion after this, because This is a real treat, guys. I haven't shown this to anyone because I was embarrassed at first by how screwed up, like, even just the title page was. But now I don't care, so I'm just like, let's all laugh at this and just kind of reflect on how this reflects on us as horse people. If a child did this, me as a 5 or 6 year old, I'll include a photo of me as a 5 or 6 year old right here for reference, so that you can see that I was like 3 inches tall and this innocent looking motherfucker that drew a freaking demon horse. It says, I knew it would fall, and as you can see, there's like a trillion different people freaking whipping and like roping the horse. There's someone whose horse is doing like a freaking handstand right there as it like bucks so she can get a better angle of the rope around his neck. Yeah, it looks like there's a lot of ropes. They might be whipping him. And as you can see, it doesn't really look that far off some of the TikTok videos that I did in my reacting to horse training video. So that's kind of funny because I might have been a bit of a prophet for seeing the future of today, because I'm pretty sure there's a TikTok somewhere out there that looks exactly like this. And if anyone finds it, please freaking send it to me, because we can ask them if they'd like to star in my live action version of the stallion once I get my movie deal. Look at this smug bitch. Look at her. Look at how smug she is. And this one too. They're just like, yeah, we're just screwing up the stallion's day right now. We don't give a fuck. So I realized that page 1 didn't start off well. I thought that it at least started off a little less messed up and kind of went, oh boy, the next page is even worse. Anyways, like it really, oh, a hummingbird. There's a hummingbird out my window. Ah! Okay, sorry, back to it. Anyways, the next page is even worse. This doesn't have any writing on it, so I guess we're just supposed to react to the imagery, which is easy to do because it's pretty troubling. So it appears that they are just dragging the stallion as he like goes ass over tea kettle, getting pulled along the dirt, and the little horse is now helping the singular lady pull him, ? And the other lady is nowhere to be found. So I guess they just used the little horse to pull him, and he's just dragging along. Like, what the heck did they do to him? Oh my god. Oh my god. Okay, this one also has no writing on it. I preferred to let my imaging speak for itself. Again, this looks just like a TikTok, does it not? He's tied to the patient's pole in a rope halter, and it appears that he is having a leg doctored, probably from the bad people injuring it. So the stallion doesn't look very happy. He also looks like his neck has disappeared. Maybe the roping kind of eroded it on his way as they dragged him through the desert like a sack of rocks. But this yellow person looks like she might be nicer than the rest. She's got a smile on and she's bandaging him. So maybe we got a good guy here. Maybe. Oh wait, also reflecting to Spirit. Maybe I wrote this after I saw Spirit the first time, but the sun beating down on him with the patient's pole. Okay, yet again, another page with no explanation. So we got a cloud now. Looks like that's either a sun or some wind. He's tied to the pole really dangerously. They decided it would be a great idea to do it at like the bottom end of the pole, the people who captured him. So we know that they're experienced horse people with that in mind. And then we got him. His tail's nice and full now. Looks like he put all his body energy into just growing that tail and not to putting any weight on. Also, he grew a bit more of a neck than a long forelock. But still tied to the pole under a cloud. Looks a little less oh no, he's still unhappy. You can see a frown right up there. See? It's like I thought I was gonna draw a smile and then I changed my mind last minute and added the frown. Oh my god! So if you thought that I was a troubled child before this next page is really gonna do you in. I'm hoping that because of some of these staples came loose, that I'm missing a couple of pages and that there's a better explanation to this next page. But in the event that there's not, we're assuming that what has happened at this point, recap, the stallion was presumably minding his own business, just chilling, being a wild stallion. They decided to round him up and capture him with their 2 horses, and then proceeded to drag him all the way home, giving him a leg injury that they then doctored. He healed while standing tied to the patient's pole for God knows how long, and then this is the next page. So, we're just gonna reflect on this for a minute, because what in the ever-loving flippity-floppity fluck? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is going on there? They're obviously very evil. They're whipping him now for no reason, and he's doing, like, his splayed out, flying through the air, like, ragdoll-ness that he did when he was getting dragged up that way. So, yeah, and again, no explanation. I've written, I think, maybe 1 or 2 sentences this entire book. So we really don't know what's going on, and I am concerned for the stallion. And we all should be, because this is a 5 or 6-year-old child. Look at this chick with her freaking... Is this the smug chick from the first scene? Look at them. Like, clearly I didn't think very highly of horse training and capturing people, hey? Like, I think this speaks volumes for the crap that I was seeing as a youngster. Okay, next page. So, it appears here that the stallion is looking kind of dead. We're not sure if he's alive. I think this is his baby mama, who looks like a goldfish with legs. And this is probably his baby, who's a tiny scribbly dot. And they appear to have found his dead body that the people just left after beating him to death. I'm sorry to ruin your perception of me like this, because this is... What is this? Do any psychiatrists follow me that want to talk about this? Or psychologists? A sentence! I wrote a sentence. 2 years later. Oh, 2 years. 2 years later. I'm assuming, because, like, it wasn't clear. I would say I would ask the author, but considering I'm the author, I'm just gonna guess. I'm assuming this is the stallion's son, like the baby from the other photo, and then we're just to assume that they just decided to capture the stallion to kill him. Because this looks like a little guy. And yeah, this is the last page, so this is just the explanation we get. And this is why we need to read The Stallion 2. I'm going to dedicate my life to trying to track down where The Stallion 2 is. Because it exists. I'm positive of this. It's not a fever dream. I've read it before. My mom has read it before. It exists. Phoebe, no. So, a quick recap. This story starts off at a frickin' sprint by just starting off with this. I knew it would fall. So they knew he would fall, and then they would then drag his poor body through the desert. Here we go, getting dragged. Patients pulling it up. Nice. And getting doctored. Still patients pulling, like, a year later, presumably. And then just getting beat to the question mark death. Family mourning circle. And 2 years later, whoever that is it the stallion? Is it his son? Your guess is as good as mine. Nice. So I'm sure, as we've established now, I was a little bit of a troubled child. That is not the only horse book I wrote. I wrote lots. That's the only one I can track down right now. I would love to track down The Stallion 2, and I will try to, because I think it needs another book review. My review for that book is 1, very troubling. 2, unclear what actually happened, needs more detail. And 3, you cannot give yourself the best book award. So I'd give it like a 6 out of 10 for suspense, because we don't know what happened, and, like, I mean, the art was okay. But anyways, the reason why I kind of wanted to read the book and then talk about the horse world in reference to what I wrote in the book is because, as like a 5 or 6-year-old that I would have been when I wrote that book, I wouldn't have really had a context of like how horses were treated outside of what I had either seen at the barn or at horse shows or in movies and TV shows. And the reason why I say this is because, especially when I was growing up as a kid, I would have only been 5 or 6, as I said. And the internet and, like, even just, like, cable TV and stuff wasn't what it is today. Like, we couldn't just, like, record our favorite shows. Like, when I first started watching Heartland, we had to be at the TV at like 7 p.m. on Sunday or whenever it came on. Otherwise, you'd miss it and you'd have to wait for them to put out the recap videos months later after the entire season's over. So you had to be on it. You couldn't just like record your TV, and the internet didn't really exist in how it does today, and obviously at 5 and 6 I wouldn't have been able to really access it anyways. But even still, even if I could, it was not at all what it is today. You couldn't organize in groups on like Facebook or Instagram and other social medias like that because they didn't exist. So there wasn't really the same ability to come together with people and have discussion and learn about different methods and whatnot. So what this meant is that I was entirely reliant on the role model that was my trainer or any other trainers that I respected, friends around the barn, and also people that I'd see in TV shows and movies. And a lot of horse movies picked horse training as like breaking their spirit and having like this wild animal that you're needing to like domesticate and having it be like this whole like spirited like bronking horse thing where it's always this like big bucking festival when they're getting broken. And it's interesting because it really goes against like how a lot of dog training is depicted in the media, because it's not like the bad guys in dog movies when you're watching them would be the ones that are like pulling at the dog and always getting mad at it and like punishing it and trying to just like force the dog to do things instead of developing like a relationship with the dog. And anyways, I think my writing of the book kind of speaks for that, because like with all the whipping and beating and like breaking his spirit type depictions that are in that book, I would have only been able to get those from what I saw in person and from what I saw on TV. Like the book, I think, is like a good metaphor for how that indoctrination happens, because when you're a young kid, you don't want horses getting hurt, and it's pretty clear that how I illustrated and wrote that book, I'm not on the side of the people. They're depicted as bad guys. So in my head, I was viewing these people as bad and like harming the horse. But then over time, I was conditioned to be okay with a lot of those very same types of mindsets. And what I mean by that, it's not that I would like beat and kill and drag a horse through the desert, or that any of my trainers at any point did stuff like that. And they didn't do the patience pull stuff like that. But they didn't really teach a good foundation of how to like understand horse behaviors and how to respond to misbehavior. Like from a very young age, I was always taught that the response to a horse who bites is swatting them in the mouth. And this set me up for failure as a kid and also put me in harm's way, because it doesn't ever really address why the horse is biting, and it only teaches you to right away look at something like that as the horse being bad to you and discipline it accordingly, rather than questioning why the biting's happening in the first place. It led me on this path where I thought that that was okay, and it very much encouraged me then to take out like my frustrations on the horse when the horse is misbehaving and it messes up your day, that it's okay to keep disciplining them because it's the horse who's being bad. And despite always being told it's never the horse's fault, it was very clear that like through actions that it actually was always the horse who was at fault, because it's the horse that's getting disciplined and punished without any real fairness and understanding, because there's no effort on the part of the human to understand what the horse is trying to say. So basically what I'm trying to say is that the way the horse world works is when you're getting into the horse world as a newbie, first of all, you're treated like a beginner who doesn't understand anything about horses, especially if you're a child. You're taught all the basics and you believe them blindly because this is your first source of information on horses, because again, until recently there wasn't a whole lot of like easy to find and read areas of education on horse behavior in specific, and even today it's still very misrepresented in the media and in movies and TV shows. Even shows like Heartland that are very much about like horse life, it's not depicted properly. They always make the horses make way too much noises and communicate in ways that just don't happen. So it sets off this incorrect idea of how horses communicate and teaches people to ignore their behaviors because they're more used to like hearing vocalizations and more clear signs of communication in the media. And then when you go to lessons, people will go as far as misrepresenting stress signals and saying that things like quit cribbing and weaving are things that they're not. And they'll also do that for undersaddle stuff like tail swishing, biting at the girth when a horse is being attacked, and just having these types of misbehavior or conflict behaviors or stress behaviors that are being portrayed as something different. So then you have this person who's soaking up all this information like a sponge, and since it's the foundation, it's Really? Really? And since this is the foundation that they learn at the beginning of their riding career, it means that it's information that they'll typically take with them and believe as the truth for the future of their riding career. Unless they move to a different barn and have a trainer who really starts singing a different tune and correcting all of their misconceptions, they're highly likely to continue taking them along with them and believing them more and more and just never questioning them, because they're like the first thing that they learned about horses. And then you grow so much since then that you feel like you know way more than you might actually, and you might not have questioned those biases yet, but you just believe them because they're one of the first things you've learned. And then this makes people easy to indoctrinate into these types of mindsets that serve only to like blame the horse and encourage people to take out their anger more onto the horse than what they would view as acceptable on another animal. As a kid, like, horses were my absolute favorite animal, still are. I was obsessed with them. I loved them. I wanted to like live, breathe, think, everything horses. I played with like Playmobil horses. I played with Breyer horses. When I wasn't riding, I was playing with horses, playing on Horseland, like the virtual website, doing horse role-playing games on like pro boards and forums like that back in the day. People today probably don't still do that. But I wanted to do everything horsey. So when I couldn't do what I wanted in real life with horses, I got to create that type of thing on like a role-playing game. Like, yeah, Horse Isle, Horseland, like Barbie Horse Adventure, and I could create this entire narrative and run the farm how I wanted to and kind of break free from stuff that I might not have control over in my day-to-day life with horse. It kind of all gets tainted when you're taught a different thought process than what you would have initially gone into it with. So anyways, I loved horses to death. I wanted to do everything horsey, and just my entire dream and life goal was to have a horse of my own one day. I never wanted to intentionally hurt horses, but a lot of what I was taught from a young age, especially like the bits that they would give me to ride and show in when I was competing on the Arab circuit, and different types of equipment and just riding style in general, a lot of it that I was taught was harmful to the horse. So then when I later had to reckon with the idea that what I was doing was harmful, it was very hard for me because I loved horses. I didn't want to ever hurt my horses, and I also didn't want to have to sit with the guilt and realization that potentially things that I had been taught had actually been harmful. And I think that's why a lot of people are resistant to change and don't want to welcome ideas that might attack things that they've grown comfortable with doing and don't want to view as problematic, like the patience pole and some of the other stuff that I talked about in my last video. Like with me, what this meant is that I was taught to do things like, when I was young and I wasn't very strong and I had a hard time getting a horse into a frame, one of my instructors taught me to seesaw the reins, which is like going like this. And it's really hard on the mouth and it acts like a saw on the lips. It's not nice to the horse. And I also wrote in bits like very thin twisted wires, like this thin, because they'd make the horse softer, or draw reins and other forms of constrictive tie down. This was all stuff that I just blindly did because it was what I was taught by people I trusted, and I never questioned at the time that it could be bad for the horse. So when I later had to, it was very hard for me to come to terms with initially. And then when you start undoing all of those things and realizing that you only know what you know at a certain point, it gets easier and easier to come to terms with those things, and then that's where you start to kind of change faster. But that whole mindset and wanting to like protect yourself from guilt is why I think there's a lack of change in the horse world, and why some people are resistant to things that in other people's eyes are like right in front of their faces and like blatantly obvious. It all comes down to like how you were taught and who your role models are. And if you were taught by people who were very traditionalist and who kind of like brushed off the idea of punishment as being no biggie and it was like their go-to thing for any misbehavior, it's a lot harder to come to terms with the idea that you can train a horse in a kinder way and still have it behave and not have it become a problem or a dangerous horse, because you're brainwashed to think that punishment is your only option because it justifies and like forces your hand and allows you to take out frustration on the horse, which is then reinforcing to you as a punisher. And breaking free of that mindset even as you learn more is hard to do because people teach you at a young age that it's just like a go-to reaction to just punish a bad behavior. I think the book kind of speaks for that, because that would have been nearer to the start of my riding career where I'd still kind of fight against that type of stuff. But then later down the road, I would see things like my trainers at the time riding in these harsh bits and equipments. And I even saw one time a trainer that I no longer trained with but saw at a show. Her horse go into the arena with spur patches like this big, raw skin. on the horse's side, and it made me uncomfortable, and I wanted to report it to the show steward, but I was afraid to because of backlash. And she was able to go into the class and even place without getting kicked out of the class, which speaks volumes for how enabled this type of mindset is even at a show level. I don't think that you'd get away with it that well now, but it was obvious enough that the judges and stuff obviously saw, so there is just no reason why the horse should have been able to pin, let alone go into the class in the first place. Basically, if those are your role models and that's what you're taught, it doesn't really teach you to question that type of behavior, and until you're really forced to look at it and question it, it's hard to adjust that type of behavior, especially if it's something that you're taught from a very young age. And it's even harder when you're like the greenie or the newbie, because if you ever do speak up, you're very quickly shut down by people who are more experienced and will be like, I've been on the horse for this amount of time, you don't know what you're talking about, stay in your lane and listen to people who are more experienced than you. And then it just teaches you to never voice your opinion because it's kind of humiliating and uncomfortable, and then people stop questioning and then they just go blindly along with it. And I think that's kind of why it made it easier for me to stop questioning things even when they made me uncomfortable, because even if it was my mom that was advocating for me, if we got shut down, we were perceived as the less experienced people. And even by people like farriers or vets or trainers, if we had a concern that we brought up to them that they didn't like, and they were one of these more traditional, conservative, not wanting to sway from what they know type people, they would try to make you feel stupid so that they feel right. And then it teaches you to just never speak up, because these people who are perceived as more experienced are trying to actively embarrass and humiliate you for speaking up about something that makes you uncomfortable. And then it teaches people not to say anything. And I think that this happens a lot on the internet too, because some of the most abusive voices are the loudest in the defense of the abuse. Well, no, not some of them, all of them. So when you comment on videos where people are doing this overwhelmingly abusive, like harsh training to horses, where the horse is panicking, like trying to go through fences, like throwing themselves and just behaving dangerously, and they're trying to do stuff like rope them or like hit them and trap the horse more, essentially. If you look on those comment sections, there's a large category of people that will defend it, and they defend it by being like, oh, you're so stupid, you don't know what you're talking about, I bet you can't even ride, you've never broken a horse. And it's all about like putting down your experience level and trying to make you feel stupid and humiliated just so that you shut up. And with a lot of people it works, because if you don't feel that you know enough to back your point, it's really hard to stand up to those belligerent types of loud people, especially when they're being really nasty in how they speak to you. Eventually we got to get to the point where people just stand their ground against these people, because that group of people is becoming smaller and smaller because less people are condoning it. And this isn't to say that I think like any use of horses is bad in sport, or that I think all horse trainers are bad, or that all competitive riders are bad. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's just to speak for the fact that there is a certain level of indoctrination that occurs in the horse world. It's something that we need to start being conscious of and talking about if it's going to be changed, because we have to talk about the psychology behind why this happens and why people are resistant to change, and why it's something that it's hard to change from, and why it's disheartening to have to even consider basically retraining how you handle horses and retraining how you think horses behave and think when you've been trained wrong, because it isn't fair. If you're paying people to train you how to work with horses and how to ride, they should be doing it right. And it's really disheartening that there's so few regulatory boards and so few certifications to help guarantee that people are teaching correct information. And it sucks and it's frustrating when you have to undo a lot of biases that you were trained by someone who should have been trusted to teach you the right way. And some people's way of dealing with that is to deny that it's a problem in the first place. And it makes it hard to teach them. It can be frustrating to deal with people like that, but we have to try to understand where it's coming from. But yeah, this is why I don't really take like a purist approach to things, because first of all, like, not all of my clients are going to be comfortable with me using food along every step of the way of training their horse. So if I want to make the biggest difference, I need to find a way to make methods more palatable to people who aren't quite there yet. So I use positive and negative reinforcement, and I've been trying to like immensely limit the amount of punishment I've been using, especially positive punishment, especially over the years, because like I said, my trainers taught me to use a lot of it. So it was kind of my go-to thing for fixing any ill behavior while growing up and working with those trainers. And then when I broke away from that type of methodology in my teens, I started to kind of distance myself more and more. But it took a lot of time because reckoning with yourself, as I said, is hard, and I was in denial for a decent portion of that. But my point is that if not all of my clients are on board with science-based methods, and if they don't think that it works, or if they're concerned about their horses becoming mouthy and stuff, if I stand hard and fast in my approach and say I refuse to work with your horse unless you let me do it completely this way, I would lose a lot of ability to change people's opinions for the better and to show them that a better way is possible, but without going 100% that way, if that makes sense. There's certain things that I will tell people I want to use food for because otherwise it's more dangerous for myself. Like when I'm working with extreme fear cases like trailering horses who are terrified of the trailer or tying and so on and so forth, food allows me to do my job faster and better. So with stuff like that, I would strongly encourage the owners to allow me to do it and just let them watch and see that it works. But if I stood hard and fast in my approach and said that any negative reinforcement is bad, no matter how you do it and you're abusive, I would alienate a ton of people, and it would ruin my ability to help people do better. So I think that there's like a happy medium type approach. I think the horse world is super behind with how we welcome reward-based training because it's very much used as the primary type of training in a lot of other animal industries. So the horse world's very behind in that way, and I agree with that. However, since we are so behind, going completely in the opposite direction for people who haven't made that change yet and are still trying to learn and undo biases, it's way too much, and it's going to create this divide that'll then tear the horse world in half, and it's going to be a problem. So I think the key is that there's obviously more than one correct way to train a horse, but we need to completely sway away from types of training that serve to only discipline or punish a behavior and not look for the cause of the behavior and don't honestly portray stress behaviors. And that's kind of where I put my foot down, because if people are condoning really rough training that serves to only terrify the horse or punish them or scare them, and if they're misrepresenting behaviors that we know what the behavior is, that's just spreading misinformation. And I think that's where people should be shut down and corrected. And if they want to continue believing what they want, that's fine, but they shouldn't be allowed to carry that out loudly on the internet like their opinion holds as much merit as the scientifically backed ones. But I don't think that it's productive for people to be like, oh, you have to completely go the opposite of everything that you've been taught right now 100% of the time with little to no assistance, because honestly there's not enough science-based trainers to help the number of people that need help. So we need people that are kind of in the middle and help people along the way, and then it's like a ladder and you're taking steps up the ladder to get to where you're comfortable being and where you've found more harmony with your horse, and your horse is having more of their needs met, they're being listened to more, and their behaviors are being represented more properly in training, and so on and so forth. And that doesn't always look like 100% purist. To make the biggest difference, we need to reach the largest number of people and try to kind of bring them together so that there's actual conversation and we can start to learn and adapt and learn new ways from people. Because even with negative reinforcement trainers, there's good ones and bad ones, and there's good ways to apply negative reinforcement training, and there's really, really bad ways to do it. The traditional forms of training, typically, in my opinion, a lot of them misuse negative reinforcement and will use it to the point where it becomes punishing because they'll just get louder and louder as the horse doesn't understand what they're trying to say, and then they scare the horse. But there's a correct way to use it that is the least stress-inducing to the horse possible. And I think that should be explored more and talked about more and normalized more for in situations where it's not necessarily practical to use positive reinforcement, especially since we have such a large portion of people that are completely not receptive to even hearing about that as a possible training method. But like I said, the biases in being taught something so improperly from the get-go and then having to like basically retrain yourself, that's what makes it so difficult. And I think that's why it's interesting to look at like what people are taught from a young age that enables them to continue thinking in a problematic way of thinking. So if any of you have similar experiences with what you were taught like as a young rider to do by a trainer, let me know in the comments, because I bet there's lots of them. I have lots more that I could share, like little things that I was taught to believe that were true true or okay to do to horses from a young age that I took for myself for years, until eventually I came across someone who's like, what the hell are you doing? And then changed it and learned better. Or I would find like an article that was like, what the hell are you doing? And I was like, oh my god, I didn't even know that this was a problem. And then learned the hard way. And I'm sure lots of people have those, because there's like virtually no governing board to make sure that trainers are qualified, which is a large part of this problem. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked my messed up book, and I hope you still want to follow me after this video of seeing how messed up I was as a child. Don't forget to check out my merch. There's lots in store. It's really cute Christmas designs and more. And yeah, supporting a small business. Shop small this year if you can, because small businesses appreciate your orders way more than billionaires do. I promise you. And we put them to better use, baby. So thank you, guys. Have a good day. And I hope you don't get nightmares from my book. And don't catch the stallion. My stallion has no nuts anymore out there, so I guess I already captured him and tamed him.